Okay. Thank you so much, Assad, for joining Rehman and I tonight on Vonvo.com to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Um, so quickly, just to jump right into it, where are you located exactly, and what do you do? Can you just give us a background quickly of yourself?
I am in my parents' basement.
Very cool. Where's that?
It's in Oakville, Ontario, outside of Toronto. I'm a lawyer by training. Um, and yeah, that's a brief background of myself.
Okay, cool. So overall, I mean, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I mean, is there a particular side that you usually favor? What's kind of with everything been going down? What's been your overall consensus of everything going on over there?
Is there really a side? I mean, I don't know if you can take. There are people who take sides, obviously, but I don't think there's. I don't think there's really a side you can take without uh, feeling some empathy for the other side.
Hmm.
It's not a game. It's not a sport
Yeah.
in which you can be like, yeah, I'm rooting for this team. I'm rooting for that team. And I think what happens when I talk to people about it, regardless of who I talk to, if they fall on a certain side, I often, just because maybe it's the lawyer in me or because I enjoy conflict myself, I try and argue the other side.
Hmm.
So I don't have a lot of friends as a consequence, but I think it's important to at least try and balance a conversation or empathize, um, because let's face it, neither party wants to be in the situation that they're in.
Okay. So I mean, you bring up a good point where just so you know, like that's exactly what Vonvo aims to do is like bring a balanced, objective discussion to these current events. So that's great that that's kind of how you feel as well. So I mean, overall, like about a week or so back, there was a ceasefire. Ceasefire. Did you think that that was a more positive action for Israelis to take or for Palestinians to take? Did you think it, was a better move for one or the other, or overall just a good move?
Um, well, I think when you when you look at what people are up against, the aggressors in Gaza, members of Hamas, or members of the militant wing of Hamas, uh, they're firing rockets into Israel. Now, in the last decade or so, the rockets have mostly been tennis balls filled with shrapnel, or tennis balls filled with nails, or whatever, some sort of jury-rigged contraption that they fire across the border. In this past conflict, however, from what I understand, they had a little bit of an upgrade in weapons, and I think that came maybe from Syria, maybe from Libya. Who knows? I mean, that's just speculation on my part. But nevertheless, even with upgrade in weaponry, uh, when you're up against, the IDF, and they have helicopters, planes, complex equipment, they have technology that's not seen elsewhere in the world. I think it's in your best interest to try and negotiate a truce. Otherwise, you're very quickly going to find yourself staring down the wrong end of a really high-powered rifle,
Hmm.
and that wouldn't be what that wouldn't be good for the military wing of Hamas because they'd get wiped out, and that wouldn't be good for the political wing of Hamas because they'd see a lot of civilian casualties.
Yeah.
So I think for Hamas, it was a good move to try and negotiate that truce.
Uh,
I also
yeah. Go ahead,
I
Ron.
might be a little bit more jaded, just in terms of I've seen these ceasefires come and go for years, if not decades now. So,
right.
do you really feel that this one's different than other ones?
I never said it was different. I never said it would work. I never said it would stand. But is it a good idea to try and negotiate a ceasefire if you're being fired at or if you're firing upon someone else? Yeah, it's a good idea. it wouldn't help either party if either parties kept up their offensive. You would just see mounting casualties. Whether or not this ceasefire works, yeah, fine, you may be jaded, but what's the alternative to being jaded about it?
Now, one question I'd ask is, because I hadn't heard it before, so I want you to maybe elaborate on it, is your thought before about rockets being filled with like tennis balls and stuff. Where have you gotten that information from, or where have you heard that before? Because that's honestly the first time that I'm hearing it. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so from what I've read, and obviously, anything fired has the potential to cause harm.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether they're manufacturing it themselves out of homemade equipment or they're getting it, professional weapons, is besides the point. I think you have to be careful to characterize what it is that's actually being used. And I know from what I've read in the past that a lot of the things that they would fire across were basically using PVC pipes, and they're stuffing it with things and trying to fire that across. For the most part, it's not going to work, but it's more the threat of something coming across that I think that they were trying to bring out in a lot of the border regions that they could reach with those materials. And as you are well aware, in this past conflict, one of the major issues was the fact that they now had weaponry that could reach Jerusalem, could reach Tel Aviv, which previously was unheard of. And the reason that's what was unheard of is because before they had very, very crude and very homemade equipment that they were using to reach the border regions.
So like my question I would throw out there, it's a good transition. Whenever I asked any Israelis about it, they think like these guys are crazy for doing it. Like the fact that they had over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks since this has all been going down, been firing these new missiles into Jerusalem. Like I guess both of you could answer it. Like coming from a Muslim background, like how does that make you feel that this terrorist organization, would cross that line? You know what I mean? For such a holy city, like for Jews, Muslims, Christians, like how did that make you feel?
I mean, frankly, it's a stupid move for anyone to fire upon it, because you can't accomplish if you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of the militant wing of Hamas and be like, okay, what are they trying to accomplish? Nothing that they would be trying to accomplish. I can't imagine anything that they'd be trying to accomplish being accomplished by the fact that they can have a missile reach Jerusalem. If they're trying to make a statement, that's one thing, but making that statement, being able to say I can do this, and then doing it are two very different things. And doing it is much more consequential in the negative than it is positive. Obviously the Dome of the Rock is sacred in as one of the first places of worship for the Jewish people, as where Christ was crucified and resurrected for the Christians, and as where Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven for the Muslims. Can you imagine what the consequences would be if you even errantly hit that location?
Yeah,
it's just if I was the commanding officer, and one of my underlings had fired that rocket, I'd smack him and be like, "What are you doing? No, that's not a good move."
Yeah, totally. And that makes sense. Rehman, did that?
All of a sudden, any goodwill that you might have, while goodwill is hard to come by for Hamas, like any goodwill that they might have been able to garner from the fact of it's kind of David versus Goliath. Yeah, you're right. As soon as you hit, some sacred site like that, then all of a sudden it's have to be questionable.
Yeah, and I mean, and Rehman, would you mind just turning up your volume a little bit? You're good, Asad. What I was gonna say is, yeah, like that was just kind of baffled me where I'm trying to like at the same time look at Hamas like wanting to, maybe you know maybe broker peace in that region, and then like to see them, take those sorts of actions with these new missiles. Like I don't even see really what a statement, what type of statement that really makes, other than like it makes no sense. It just kind of baffled me, and I wanted to get both of your opinions on that. Um, so ultimately, when like do the two of you guys consider Hamas a terrorist organization? Like, and I mean, ultimately, do you think Israel should be trying to broker peace with an organization that is by the international community like considered a terrorist organization?
So Hamas is a bit of a catch-22, whereas on one side, the actions that they do, for instance, shooting rockets into civilized areas, can make them be considered a terrorist organization. But for the countries that they operate in, they do a fair amount of good too in terms of helping out the people. So it's always what's your perspective. I would say it's a bit of gray on both sides in terms of whether they're terrorists or whether they're freedom fighters. It's kind of hard to say.
Uh
Um, so if you say yes, I believe Hamas are is a terrorist organization, then you discount the fact that Hamas also runs many of the hospitals and schools in the region, in Gaza.
In Gaza, yeah.
And you discount the fact that they're responsible for a lot of the infrastructure that that granted has been lagging, but they're whatever infrastructure there is, they're responsible for a lot of it. On the other hand, if you say no, I don't believe Hamas is a terrorist organization, then you discount the fact that by perpetuating some of the violence that they're doing, they are in fact keeping the rest of the political world, the rest of the global political world, from engaging with them in a way that they can help their people. With any group, I think, that is situated in such a circumstance as Hamas is, and as Hamas constituents are, it's for the sake of public imagery and for the sake of public support, one has to label it this or that. But if there's anything I've learned, it's that things are much more nuanced, and you can't be so quick to label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because I think really what runs through my head, when this idea comes up is, everyone's talking about brokering a peace deal, and like they were just a newly elected government as of whatever it was 2 years ago, and as these missiles continue to rain down on Israel, it kind of makes it hard to understand how peace could actually be brokered. And I guess that kind of leads me then into one additional question regarding Hamas, like amongst Muslims at all, and maybe just up in Canada where you guys are currently living. Like, do you get a lot of different Israelis talk about how Hamas is brainwashing their kids and using doing different sorts of things such as human shielding and hiding weapons underneath hospitals and stuff. So at the same time that you say they're responsible for building these hospitals, at the same time, do you believe that they're putting those same hospitals in jeopardy by shooting missiles from those same hospitals and jeopardizing the people within those hospitals, playgrounds, etc.? Do you think that that's just totally wrong?
Do I think it's wrong that they're jeopardizing people in hospitals and children in schools?
Well, what's the rationale for doing it? Like, is there any?
What's their rationale for doing it?
Yeah. Do you have any sense of what they're? And do you?
Well, I imagine it's the same rationale that the Viet Cong had in Vietnam in utilizing their environment that they know best to their advantage. It's their style of guerrilla warfare. It's the same thing that they used in Colombia. It's the same thing they used elsewhere in the world. It's whatever. It's working with. If you have an inferior set of weaponry, but you understand the landscape, you're going to use the landscape to your advantage. Do I think that's a wise choice? Do I think that's an ethical choice? No. Do I think they're making the best military choice that they have? I don't know. I can't imagine that they have too many other military choices. It's either stop, get obliterated, or use the landscape that they have.
Do you think that their intentions are, though, so let's say that they weren't doing these sorts of things, and you say like either get wiped out. Do you think that they truly, are interested in brokering peace with the Israelis and accepting them as a Jewish state and stuff? Do you think that they really have that in? Do you think that that's part of what they're truly interested in doing?
I don't think either side is fully invested, and by either side, I don't think either militarily active side is fully committed to engaging in a peace deal. I think that each one is trying to say, well, I'm not going to do anything until they do something. And the other side saying, well, I'm not going to do anything until they do something. So it's like, where do the trick with any of these peace accords, the trick with anything that was negotiated before is who concedes first. And neither wants to. Neither wants to be the one that concedes first because it means you're also going to be the one who concedes the most.
Yep.
So are they fully committed? I don't think either side is.
Got it.
So just in the context of what's been happening recently, so Palestine has been granted UN observer status. Yeah. Does that change the game or the dynamics at all?
Does it change the game? Again, it's unfortunate.
Does it change the dynamics of the situation at all?
I think you have to understand that the recognition of Palestinian statehood is not for the Hamas-led political side of Palestine. It's for the West Bank Palestinian Authority-led side of Palestine.
Yep.
And I think they're two very different creatures in terms of their approach to the international stage. I think it doesn't make much of a difference in that the folks who still retain the most influence over the region, namely Israel, USA, and Canada, all voted against it. The other countries, important as they are, England, France, as important as they are, let's face it, they don't yield the same kind of influence in the region as Canada, US, and Israel. So it's a nice gesture. It's certainly gratifying, I think, if you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, to see that your piece of the world is now part of the larger world. But I struggle to see what kind of political difference it can make in the face of such strong opposition.
And what's also really interesting amongst all of this is what you just mentioned, where it's only representative of the West Bank area and the PLO, and yet there's a lot of stuff that goes on over there that whether it's rockets or anything, there's definitely certain things that go on in the West Bank that disrupt how Palestinians want to live, but a majority of where this terror is going on, and majority of the blame is put where Hamas is located, which is in Gaza. And so ultimately, is it possible to say that the fact that even though they got granted this statehood through the UN, it for the most part has nothing to do with Hamas and the Gaza Strip. Like that's totally dedicated to the West Bank, and therefore it really means nothing towards potentially more peace, down the road. Because is that a true statement?
I think that's a very nuanced view that not a lot of people will look deep enough to see for themselves. I think even in the news, it was reported as a victory for Palestinians, but they did not describe the nuance in the fact that it was possibly a victory for one side of the Palestinians and maybe a setback for the other side of the Palestinians, or at least the political class in each of those two territories.
Yeah.
As for what it does for Hamas, I mean, look, think about high school. If you knew that there was a kid in high school who was popular with the rest of the class, and they were just gaining in popularity, and you were this ostracized kid who was seen as sort of like a "don't play with him, he doesn't play nice" kind of guy, you'd want to try and get in with the rest of the class by riding on the coattails of this person who's rising in popularity.
Yep.
So, I mean, I just spoke about nuance, and it's sort of silly of me to try and dumb it down to this, but it does seem like a lot of global politics revolves around the same rules that your high school class did. And I think you'll see the same here.
So it's funny that you bring that up because, so two things. One, I want to move into kind of the whole media bias as well as certain facts that they don't seem to bring up to really educate others about, like what we just brought up, what we were just talking about between PLO and Hamas. But I mean, one interesting thing I've mentioned to some Israelis is I've been like, is a lot of this crisis and trying to broker peace just simply about these two sides literally just growing up and like putting past really, I don't know if the right word's not like immature differences, but like just kind of growing up and saying we're just gonna, accept one another for who we are and move on with stuff, move on with our lives. Like, and just because you dumbed it down to that, high school example, I thought it'd be interesting to throw that one at you.
Should they graduate to college? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I don't think they will. I think they will be high school dropouts. I'm taking Rehman's cynical viewpoint here in that I think that, obviously you've seen immense prosperity in Israel since 1947. Immense prosperity. They've done so well for themselves as a country. They've got such great research institutions. They've got great corporations. They've got a vibrant life. I hear Tel Aviv is an amazing city to have a great time in. On the other side, you're not seeing a lot of development in Palestine, and some of it is inhibited by sanctions and things, and some of it is self-inflicted by constantly engaging in wars that set you back, and some of it is there's nobody left to build. People have been fleeing. Yeah. So I don't think you'll see them grow up and mature. I think you'll see them grow apart, if anything.
Yeah.
Yes. So also, this is kind of echoing areas in other areas of the Middle East and other areas of the world, for that matter. People tend to take a viewpoint that you educate the populace, and in time, it's probably not going to be in the next 5 years, 10 years, but in time, with a greater educated populace, things, adaptions, people will be more willing to talk. If that's the case, and I kind of agree with you, where it's going to be difficult for these people to kind of, graduate high school and go to college or university, because there's no infrastructure in place, and because it's just literally like this handful a handful necessarily, but there's a group of this organization that is just on an offensive or defense. I don't want to say, but they're in combat mode, and they're not willing to kind of educate themselves or see different viewpoints. Would a generational thing of more education even help in this scenario?
I think you have to clarify who you're speaking of at this point.
Let's look at the young folks that live in the West Bank or Gaza or whatever you want to say, but just the folks that might eventually, by the time they hit 15, 12 years old, even or somewhere in between there, they're going to be living in a life of they've been fearful or whatever it may be, and they haven't had exactly access to the best facilities, the best infrastructure in the world. So when this organization called Hamas comes by and says, "We'll take care of you, we'll take care of your family, if in exchange for your allegiance," it sounds like a pretty lucrative offer to them, right? And so then it's just another cycle of this perpetuating itself.
Perhaps, but I think that's painting Hamas as a bit mafioso in that, or a bit simplistically in terms of like their the way they operate. I think that more people there just want opportunity and an out. Either an out literally in that they get to go somewhere else and thrive, or an out in that a stoppage in fear and in violence, just a straight stop.
Yeah.
And that'll allow them to come out of their own homes into the streets and into their own communities.
So, Dad, do you think? Yeah. Finish your point.
No, I think that's it.
Okay. So what I was going to ask is, I've spoken to Israelis. They say, we give them electricity, we give them water. They're provided with, financing to do certain things. Do you think it's more of, and I've also seen the other side of it, where it's like their roads are crap, their infrastructure is, in the tanks. So I'm wondering, from your outside point of view, do you think Israel could be doing more to help out both West Bank and Gaza, or is money that's going into those areas just not being used appropriately and it's being used for missiles? What do you think is the cause of that development not being there?
If they're using it for missiles, they're getting ripped off on the missiles because the amount of money that it comes in is not reflected in the amount of money that they spend on artillery. But for instance, look at Canada, and look at Canada's involvement with First Nations and Aboriginal communities. Canadian policy and Canadian political rhetoric will say, well, we give them reserves and schools and roads, and we send nurses up there to take care of them. But I think it's one thing to say that you do that, and another thing to do only the bare minimum so you can say that you do that. I think that in Canada we see a lot of these Aboriginal communities being neglected at worst, or at best marginally maintained, but not given the what they need to thrive. And the counter argument to that is, well, who needs handout? They should be able to make it for themselves. Maybe, but you try living up in the most desolate areas of Canada and see how well you thrive in permafrost and no electricity. It's going to make it very difficult for anyone. And I think the same thing occurs over there. Israel may supply them with electricity. Israel may supply them with water. But when you do it at a bare minimum, or when you do it in a controlled manner where it's almost like you provide a little in order to just say that you did, you know that you're not providing enough for people to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to be looked upon with animosity for controlling the faucet, if you will.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Very good. So how about I mentioned another interesting thing. Do you think a lot of the so there's been a huge wall being built across like the West Bank border, dividing kind of Israel and the West Bank, and it's huge, like 30 feet tall, whatever it is, made of absolute concrete cement. Do you think that those sorts of ideas, that whenever they came up with those ideas and then started developing it, do you think that that's only potentially worsening the situation? Do you see any rationale for them doing it, for building that wall and segregating them, isolating them, whatever you want to say?
I see the same. As far as rationale goes, their rationale for building that wall is about as appropriate as the Americans' rationale for building a wall on the border with Mexico. Yeah, it makes sense. You want to keep people out, but is it really? Does your rationale effectively translate into a real solution? In that, does that wall actually A, keep people out, and B, help the other aspects of what you're trying to do, aka or i.e. build relationships and broker peace? No, it doesn't. And I don't think anyone would say that it does. It does one thing and then it keeps people out, but it does so much more harm in so many other contexts.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned before that I want to talk about, just because it's kind of another, mission of Vonvo's or goal of ours to, kind of relay certain facts that get ignored in the corporate media. What's your take on, what the corporate media, CNN, Fox, etc., what information they relay to people? What's your take on that situation?
I can't tell you the last time I watched either of those two channels.
Okay.
I think they've lost a lot of. Both of them have lost a lot of credibility in their ability to report and their ability to get things straight. Granted, Fox never had any, but I think that even if they were getting their facts accurate, even if they were diligently reporting what is actually happening on both sides of the conflict, they would be reporting it from the lens that they think their viewers want to see, which is a North American, and more specifically American lens, which is fine because those are their viewers. But seeing as they are two of the most internationally watched news organizations, I think to rely on them as indicative of the global voice on the conflict, or even indicative of the local voice on the conflict, is disingenuous.
Yeah, well, I think though, and that's where I think this disconnect comes along, where it's a lot more on that local level where you seem to, really gauge what's actually going on and know what the real situation is versus just kind of framing the argument to fit a particular type of person, right? And then you're just exposed to, certain facts, and a lot of other facts are ignored. Would you agree with that by doing that?
I think they have a few minutes to fill, and then that this topic, to do it justice, would take hours to fill.
Yeah.
So they fill it with what they can, and they have to make editorial choices, and they do. But I think that because they make those editorial choices, they can't really call much of what they say news. They can call it editorializing. They can call it viewpoints if they wanted to make it palatable. But as far as hard news, I think it's difficult to call it that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I guess another interesting thing I would throw out there is in order to maybe turn this conversation a little more towards solution oriented, right? On both sides at this point, what do you think it will take to broker peace? On each side, what do you think it now takes based on the current situation there?
It would take. It would be fairly important for them to understand that they can't operate with the same attitudes that they've been operating with. That's not going to work. If they want, if they want change, then they have to figure out a new way of thinking on their topic. So they have to. Sorry, one moment, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry.
No problem.
That was my aunt. We're preparing for my sister's wedding, so we had to. She was wanting me to come take a look at some things upstairs. I think that both sides have to start thinking differently about what it is that they want and what it is that they're trying to accomplish. I think that by positioning themselves and saber rattling and going back to high school, acting like high school bullies or high school macho kids who are trying to like play chicken or gain the attention of the teachers and say he did it first. It's not going to work. And I think that there are elements of both societies that recognize that. There are elements of both political wings that recognize that. But it'll be a matter of which voices speak louder over the next 10 or 15 years that determines whether that attitude changes. I think as far as hard solutions, is it a two-state? Is it a one-state? Is it going back to the 1967 borders? Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? Is that? I don't know. There's no way any of us can know that at this point because there are a multitude of options, a multitude of solutions. For instance, the fact that Israel exists is because when there were people in continental Europe lobbying for a Jewish homeland, they thought Argentina was not going to work. They wanted to be closer to Europe. So between Argentina and Israel, they said, all right, we'll choose this area. Although Argentina was on the short list. Who would have thought, in the early 20s, when this idea was being floated as a very serious option, who would have thought that that would be the solution? So that is all to say, we don't know what the solution is going to be, but we do know that in order for there to be a solution, in order for there to be any movement towards a solution, then it is the attitudes that have to change first.
And so, I mean, when you look at I think every one of the Israelis I've spoken to so far, all they care about is having a normal life, living a normal life, and all they want is peace. I mean, in regards to changing that attitude, is there anything that you could even think? Like you have a lawyer background, so is there anything to even suggest of how a government like Israel begins to, approach Hamas and ask him to reformat their beliefs and sit down at a negotiating table with them? Like how do you negotiate with terrorists? Can you bring your legal background into this and how you would approach,
You negotiate with terrorists?
Yeah, how would you do that?
Well, I think the first thing to do if you are to negotiate with an organization that you call terrorists is to not call them terrorists.
Yeah.
No one in your country is gonna want you to negotiate with somebody who you call a terrorist. And language is very powerful. When you say the word terrorist, you evoke certain imagery, you evoke certain things, and no one's going to want you to negotiate with. It's like, it's like if I gave you the nickname the Butcher, and I wanted to introduce you to a girl who I thought you'd get along with. Oh yeah, you should meet this guy. We call him the Butcher. I'm pretty sure she's not going to want to hang out with you. So language is very important. I think if you're going to begin to engage with an organization, you have to reframe the way you say things.
Yeah, and okay, no, I mean that makes sense, and I'm wondering, do you believe that both sides are looking for peace? Do you believe one side is looking for peace more so than the other? I mean, you always hear this expression like they want Israel wiped off the map, right? Like they don't think they exist or anything. With those sorts of statements coming out, do you see it being possible, even if you were to adjust your language? Do you see those ideologies changing anytime soon, or those beliefs?
I think what often happens as a problem is that when someone says, Israel hates Arabs and wants them out of the country and out of the region entirely, and the first response to that is to say, well, not all Israelis. There are lots, and in fact, a great majority, who are perfectly fine with a peaceful solution that involves engaging with, their Arab neighbors. But on the flip side, when someone says those Palestinians want Israel wiped off the map, you don't often hear the same immediate counter argument in that, well, not all Palestinians. There are plenty that just want to live a good, happy life and see their children have more success than they had. But that fact is true on both sides, and that fact has to be critically recognized that it is true on both sides. Are there people in Palestine who would rather not see Israel exist? I'm sure of it. I don't doubt it. Are there people in Israel who want every Arab in Israel kicked out of the country and Palestinians, quote unquote, sent back to the Middle Ages, as it were, in this past conflict? As it was said in this past conflict, yeah, sure there are. But does that mean that's representative of the population as a whole? I don't think so.
That's where like these conversations just get more and more valuable. I feel like. Do you think it's coming down to the point where like the political parties on each side just aren't by any means representing, or aren't justifiably representing their people properly? Like, is it made because I hear that from all these Israelis, they just want peace, and yet there's no peace for decades and decades. And then, just like how you said it, there's probably plenty of Palestinians out there that would just love to live peacefully, and it's just not happening. So, is it potentially just the political parties that are totally at fault here and continue to be, and unless something changes on that end, then it'll always be that way?
Since when is a political party adequately representing the population?
Yeah. That's always a consideration. I think one of the items in play here is just recognizing the fact that there's been opportunities many, many times. It's been close many, many times. There have been sitting at the table many, many times and trying. And it's all about concessions. Who's willing to concede what? And as any politician will have to do, they're gonna say, yeah, I'm willing to do X, Y, Z in the name of peace, but at the same time they have to save face, in front of the people that voted them in. So it's always been the case of whether it's the Israelis who are willing to concede a little bit but not enough, or the Palestinians who aren't willing to concede enough, or they're trying to take too much. If some might say. So it's just a matter of getting the right personalities together. I'd almost say to go ahead and broker that peace properly. Like you see people trying for several decades. It's just you got to have the right people in place that are willing to do what's right and ultimately make the right call for their people and without sacrificing too much for either country.
Yeah. Asad, did you have a point to make on that, or?
Political parties don't do it, man. They don't make the changes that you want to see. They don't broker peace in the way you want to see it. It's not their. It is their role, but it is not a role that they do well, and they haven't done it well in any country. I mean, if you want to talk about representative politics, just take a look at what's happened with Toronto's mayor recently, and you'll see that representative politics sometimes don't really work out for the best.
Okay.
But if
we'll have to make that a topic on Vonvo.
What?
I said we'll have to make that a topic on Vonvo.
Yeah, that could be one of your next topics. Why is Toronto's mayor such an idiot? But look, if you're going to look for solutions, I don't think that the representation, quote unquote, is going to come from political parties. I think it'll come from a promulgation of civil society organizations that arise because people want to see them arise and deal with the situation in a way that's more reflective of the people's wills. There's going to be a number of organizations that emerge, and the ones that are the most successful are the ones that reflect the most number of people's views and carry with it the most probability for success.
Yeah. Great. 1 second. Let me just see if there's any other items I'd want to bring up quickly. Do you see any particular role that some of the neighboring countries right now need to play a critical role in developing peace, or is like that idea, come and gone and left like at this point? Between Egypt, I guess I don't
think any of the countries in the area are in a position to be playing a role in this conflict right now. I think they'd all like to. Some for the better, some for the worse, but I don't think any of them are in a position to do so. At best, Egypt has a role that it historically has honorably undertaken to assist in talking between the two sides. But even them, they're facing their own internal difficulties that make looking outwards very challenging. Syria obviously is out of the question. Iran's got its own problems that it needs to figure out. Maybe Turkey.
Turkey, yeah.
But Turkey didn't. I mean, Israel didn't really make too many friends with Turkey the last go around.
Yeah.
And it may be difficult to mend that relationship now.
Got it. All right. So I guess the one thought that I would leave you with, it's kind of the last question I ask most people. What would be the message? 1 second. What would be the message that you would, try and send out to people, communicate to people who are to watch this video relating to this conflict? What would you want them to know about it that you think is just either being miscommunicated by the media or whatever it may be?
I think that people have to understand that there are not just two sides to this conflict. There are many sides, and many sides that you can't casually learn about if you want to know about these sides, and more generally about this conflict. You have to actively seek out information. and actively seek out information that you agree and disagree with, because more than likely it'll help you find out what's actually the truth, and it'll help you determine where you stand, and it'll help you determine what you think is the best way to proceed, and have a conversation about that with others. And I think that conversation part is key. I think you can collect all the information you want, but if you're only keeping it inside you, then you're not doing anyone else any good. So share it with others. Share it with people who disagree with you, and hopefully, multilateral global conversations like this can help.
Yeah. So do you think that's where maybe Vonvo could play a role in these sorts of objective, engaging discussions where these ideas are just simply laid out on the table and talk back and forth? I mean, do you see that as being the most effective? It sounds like.
I think the more voices that an entity like Vonvo collects, the more sides and the more perspectives it reflects.
Yeah.
And it's important to take a step back and see all of those voices and see all of those reflections, because that's the only way that you're going to understand that there are more than two sides to this. And I think Vonvo may be a good place to aggregate all of those perspectives.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely what we're doing. So I'm glad that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're actively looking to have go on here. So Asad, I wanted to thank you for joining Rehman and I, sharing that perspective, because you clearly have a significant amount of knowledge on the topic. So this was great that we had you come on. I really appreciate it. I know Rehman does as well.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks so much.